Looking to get a hardware wallet, but you can't decide between the Ledger and the Trezor? Let's take a look at both and find the right hardware wallet for you. Welcome back to Woodland Pools, your place for the latest Cardano news, tutorials, and the information you need to grow your investment with confidence. Today, it's time to compare the Ledger versus the Trezor. Both of them have a couple different options in terms of which wallets you could actually buy, but for the sake of this comparison, we'll be comparing the Ledger Nano X to the Trezor Model T. Both have their strengths and weaknesses. We'll go through all of them together. We'll go through the philosophy of the companies, the form factor of the devices themselves, the security implications for each, what coins they support, what the user interface looks like when we're actually interfacing with the wallet, the price points, and then our final conclusions on the two. Let's jump in. So the first thing we'll take a look at is the company's philosophy. Aside from an obvious focus on security, what are the other guiding principles that leads the company to their decisions in terms of how they package, put together, and present the different aspects of the wallet? Let's take a look first at Ledger. If we come to Ledger's website and we go to Learn and Why Choose Ledger, they have a nice article here where they present a lot of different information, but really it all boils down to this one line. We've created an ecosystem that lets you simply secure, store, and manage your crypto assets, with the key word here being ecosystem. What you'll see that you get with the Ledger is sort of a all-encompassed, packaged, and nice clean product that has everything all in one place and is very, very easy to use and manage. And the reason that they can do that is because the different softwares and things that they offer to package these things for you are proprietary to the Ledger company. So there's no way that you can actually inspect the code behind the scenes of how they do these things. But now if we take a look at Trezor, here's the interesting thing about them. You can actually go to GitHub/Trezor and you can actually see all of the code that goes into their wallet. Trezor's philosophy is a totally open source approach where they say, hey, we've written code for a really strong wallet and we know that it's good because we put it out there, anybody can review it, and the broader community can give us feedback on what they think of our security protocols. So what you'll notice as we go through the rest of this comparison is that the tools for the Trezor don't necessarily come together as cleanly. It doesn't feel as much of like a turnkey kind of solution, but the fact that their wallet is open source is definitely a big plus for a lot of people. So if we come back to our comparison table, let's go ahead and pull up a little check mark that we can use to compare the two. I'd say this one's a close call. We can say that, let's say Trezor wins out here in terms of philosophy because we're fans of open source. But that being said, it doesn't necessarily win by that much because there is something to be said about how nicely everything comes together on the Ledger. So let's give them a little check mark as a close runner-up in this category. So props to Trezor for the open source, but the whole Ledger turnkey ecosystem is a pretty nice thing, how it all kind of comes together. The next thing we'll want to take a look at is the actual form factor. So let's compare the two devices side by side. If we start with the Ledger, you see that it looks sort of like a USB and it slides out open here. When we plug it in, we'll see that it lights up and you get this monochrome display. So it's just the two buttons and the little monochrome. And then the Trezor has more of this sort of like boxy kind of shape to it. But the thing you'll immediately notice is this nice touchscreen right in the center. So if we plug the Trezor in, we'll see that the touchscreen lights up. Here it tells us that we're not connected, but we can do everything through the touchscreen. Now, when we look at them side by side, you might think definitely like, yeah, the touchscreen's the way that I want to go. But something that I will say though, is that on the touchscreen here, when you have to do things like put in your PIN, let's actually take a look at that. So I see here I need to tap to connect. And here is the screen to put in the PIN. The keypad does feel pretty small. Like I don't necessarily have huge hands and I do feel myself kind of feeling like I'm trying to like peck very carefully at the different digits to hit them. So even though we do have this nice responsive touchscreen, it does feel a little bit small. And then that being said, for the Ledger, even though it just has this monochrome and these little buttons, so again, if I was going to enter my PIN, it really feels like something that you get used to pretty quickly, and that typing in things like your PIN takes no time at all. So I'd say it's kind of a toss-up here. If you're a really big fan of touchscreens, keep in mind this one is a little bit smaller, but I'd say there's really nothing lost on the Ledger with its two buttons and the tiny little monochrome screen. So for this one, I would honestly say it's going to be a dead tie between them. And they're pretty much exactly the same. If anything, I would say, okay, maybe a little bit less on the Trezor here, because even though it is nice that it has the touchscreen, it sometimes feels almost like a hindrance more than actually like a benefit. But depending on your preferences, you might swap these or feel totally different about it. Something to keep in mind. Moving on to security, we see that this aspect of the two wallets is also dictated by their general philosophy that we mentioned earlier. If we come back to this same article from Ledger that we were looking at before and we scroll down, we see that their main sort of talking point in terms of security is the fact that they use a secure element, and they call it the most secure chip. They say Ledger hardware wallets integrate a certified chip designed to withstand sophisticated attacks and capable of securely hosting cryptographic data such as private keys. From a design standpoint, there are benefits to having a secure element, and it actually resides on a separate area of the device that actually never connects to the internet ever. And the part of the ledger that does connect to the broader internet asks the secure element for signatures, but the secure element itself is never exposed to the broader internet. So that's the reason why they point this out as the core of their security feature, because it is an industry recognized, very secure way to go about this. Now for Trezor, if we come to their website, if we go to Wiki, and then we click on security, if we go to their security philosophy, we can actually see here, Satoshi Labs is the name of the company that makes the Trezor. We can actually see here their security manifesto. And then again, as we were talking before about differences in philosophy and how these things drive their approaches, they say, look, we're completely open source. Everybody can check our code and see the security in it. And not only do we have a great team of developers that do testing, but the whole world can take a look at our code. And we get suggestions and peer reviews from the open source community. Obviously, both of them go into a lot more detail than what we covered here. You can go through the whole manifesto of Satoshi Labs with the Trezor and the Ledger team as well. But really, again, it goes back to the philosophy of enclosed, all-encompassed, nothing can get in here, versus open source, and we rely on the broader community to also keep us honest and effective. One other thing that I will point out, however, is that even though the Ledger wallet is extremely secure, I mean, they both are, but even though the Ledger is extremely secure and they've never had any incidents or any issues revolving around the security of their wallets, they did have a hack last year of one of their marketing database servers, and so they got access to people's contact information and things like that, which resulted in a bit of a hassle for anybody who bought Ledger products before that date, and phishing campaigns that have been going out. And this is a good time to say, watch out for these phishing campaigns. They are getting ever more elaborate, more sophisticated, but some important rules of thumb to keep in mind from a security standpoint. Nobody on any exchange, no founders or managers of any of the major cryptocurrency networks, nobody from either of the different hardware companies, nobody will ever reach out to you and ask you for your security passphrase or any of your pins or other passwords. If you ever have anyone reach out to you like that, no matter how official it sounds, it's definitely a scam. So please be careful with that. So that being said, if we come to our comparative chart here, from a security standpoint, for the things that matter in terms of the security of your actual device, they are dead on. Again, since we've been doing little tweaks here and there, I will say it was a hassle having to deal with some of these, phishing messages and things. But, I don't know. So I kind of want to make this like bigger or smaller, I don't know. From a security standpoint of the wallet, they're dead even. Their marketing server being hacked, that was obnoxious. But I don't know. At the end of the day, our main concern here is the security of our actual coins on our device. And aside from the philosophy behind them, they're both incredibly secure wallets. The next thing we're going to want to look at is the coins that they support. So let's go to their different sites. So starting here on the main Ledger site, we see here what we were talking about before, ongoing phishing campaigns. But anyhow, looking at coins. On the Ledger site, if we come to crypto assets, we can see here just a ton of different coins. I mean, the list goes on and on. I think that their total count is somewhere in the hundreds of coins. But I mean, pretty much any coin that you can think of is supported by the wallet. I'd recommend that you come through and make sure that any specific coins you're planning on hosting, that you make sure that are on this list. But I mean, pretty much any coin that we've wanted to work with has been on this list. Then if we go to Trezor, and we come to their site, let's click on Get Your Trezor. And here we see their list of their coins supported. So we'll click on here. And then again, just super long list. I think that they say that their total is over 1,600 coins. So if you're planning on buying a lot of really small or obscure altcoins, this might affect your decision. You might want to check between the two. But for 95% of people, if you look, they both support all of the main coins, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Cardano. They're all on here. So for this one, truly, unless you're doing a lot of altcoin trading, the coins supported for both is truly dead on. Next, if we want to take a look at the user interface, and by this we mean we've already looked at the form factor of the devices. Let's now look at the interface that we work with when we're trying to manage our coins. So let's start with Ledger. Ledger, as we saw in their philosophy on their page, tries to do everything in a nice packaged and turnkey way. And so for that, they provide a nice interface for you called Ledger Live. So if we open up Ledger Live, right now my wallet's actually plugged in, but let me unplug it. So I've disconnected my Ledger. We see here I still have access to the balances of my accounts, and I can look at them and see some details. Obviously, I have nothing in these accounts right now, but I have access to this wallet, and if I were to look at my portfolio, it would give me real-time totals, even though the wallet's not plugged in. The reason for this is when you've plugged in and synced your wallet, what Ledger Live does is it says, okay, these are the addresses associated with this wallet, and now keep in mind that these addresses are on the blockchain and publicly accessible to anyone. If anybody knows your addresses, they can just go on a blockchain explorer and see the balance on that address. And so because of that, they just track what your addresses are, and you always have a nice quick view of your balances at the moment. But if you wanted to do something like send things off the wallet, then you would need to actually plug your device in, because the hardware wallet itself is where the private keys live that generate the signatures to say, yes, this is me sending the transaction. So it's a nice sort of best of both worlds where you can get a quick glance at all of your balances that's memoized and remembered for you, but you can be sure that nothing's going to be sent or staked or received without your permission because you need to actually plug the wallet in to make that transaction happen. Next, if we take a look at Trezor, and so one thing to note here is that you see how it's asking us to follow the instructions on the Trezor. So again, I'm going to have to enter my PIN. And now that it's verified it, my balances will open up and I'll have access to them. Again, this is a wallet we had just set up, so we don't have any balances here, but yeah, it's ready to use. We can receive, we can send. We're going to do the same kind of confirmations on the device when we're trying to do any kind of transactions. But one thing I want to point out is that due to the open philosophy and open source nature of the Trezor, their whole dashboard is managed through an actual website that you go to. So one, it doesn't necessarily feel as clean and ready to go as a desktop application like Ledger Live. But the other element too is that if I unplug my Trezor, we'll see here that it immediately tells me, hey, plug that back in. So you don't get any kind of memoization, no kind of nice sort of place that holds everything for you. You have to actually physically have the device plugged in at all times to have access to it. The other thing that I'll say is that with the Ledger Nano X, Ledger actually has support for both an iOS and an Android application that can connect through Bluetooth wirelessly to your device for you to manage those balances, and then you would click on the device to approve the transaction. Currently, I believe Trezor has support for Android only, but that's still in the works. So if mobile is important to you and you're not going to necessarily want to be sitting down at a desktop to do your work, then that might sway you over to the Ledger as well. But personally, if we come back to our comparator chart, this is the first one where it really stands out that it just feels like the Ledger really wins out here in terms of the user interface and how we manage our balances. Yes, the Trezor suite is nicely put together, and the way that you navigate through it and the things that you can do are really nice. But something about having to actually come to a website, and even just the way that it all kind of comes together, doesn't feel as clean and as just put together as the Ledger does. And again, this is reflected in their philosophy that we've talked about several times. Ledger's whole thing is about, let's have something that's really easy and smooth to work with. We'll connect everything for you and it's all ready to go, and it's all about the user experience. Whereas the Trezor is all about an open source approach and using the appropriate technologies to be able to facilitate that. So for this one, we have to say the Ledger wins out on user interface for sure. The next thing we're going to want to look at is price. So let's go back to their websites again. And let's get our Ledger Nano X. We can see here that as of today, the Ledger Nano X is going for about 119 US dollars. And if we go to the Trezor and say, let's get our Trezor now, theirs is priced in euros, and so the US dollar equivalent will fluctuate. But the Trezor, at least as of when this video is being filmed, is closer to almost $200. So you see it's about a $60 difference between the Trezor and the Ledger. So unless there's something specific about the Trezor that you really, really like, or if maybe their open source philosophy is something that really puts you over the edge and says, no, this is definitely where I want to go, that extra $50 to $60 is kind of hard to stomach for basically two products that are interchangeable in terms of the things that they can do and the features they provide. So again, for this one, it seems a clear win in our mind that the Ledger wins out here. In terms of what we're trying to do, store our coins securely, in terms of their security protocols that they each use, everything else seems like if we look at these different things here, they're all pretty close. So it feels kind of hard to justify the price difference. So then if we look at everything all put together, from a philosophy standpoint, Ledger's philosophy of, hey, we're going to put everything for you nice and compact. Trezor saying, hey, open source is the way to go, and we want to make sure everyone has access to view the code of the device that they're running. Trezor wins out here, not by a lot, but they definitely do. From a form factor standpoint, the The touchscreen is nice, but can actually be a little bit clunky sometimes, and so the Ledger actually wins, even though it's a lot more simplistic. From a security standpoint, they're nearly identical. There is the hassle of the marketing database that was hacked for Ledger, but again, these kinds of phishing scams are here to stay, and they're kind of just part of living in the cryptocurrency ecosystem. So I'm not trying to minimize and say, hey, it's no big deal that their marketing servers were hacked. But that being said, if the result of that was some additional phishing hassles, phishing is here to stay and something we're gonna have to always deal with. So in our mind, the security is nearly exactly the same, but we did want to make you aware of that marketing issue. From a supported coins standpoint, unless you're going to be working with lots of obscure coins, they're basically neck and neck. From a user interface standpoint, it's our opinion that the Ledger kind of comes together a lot more nicely. Again, deliberately so, right? Because of the fact that they can have more control over putting everything together for you. And from a price standpoint, Ledger is $50 to $60 cheaper. So all these things considered, our vote, if we had to choose just one, would be to go with the Ledger. It was the first hardware wallet that we got, and even though now we have both, it's the one that we primarily use. But I am genuinely curious, what do you all think? Are you a huge fan of the Trezor and you feel like there's certain things that we didn't do justice? Let us know in the comments below. And keep in mind that this final conclusion is just our opinion. So now that we've covered both, and you've decided which one is right for you, check out our next series of videos on setting up your Ledger Nano X from scratch and setting up your Trezor Model T from scratch. Thanks for digging in with us. We'll see you in those next videos.